Howdy there, YouTube, for this third and hopefully final installment of this doctored photograph on page 127 of World War II by Dr. Frank Monaghan. Just to refresh your memory, it's about these two drawn in extra victims for effect into this photograph. The first two episodes we looked at the photograph. This time we're going to look at the book itself and the author. So the book is published by J.G. Ferguson and Associate, Geographical Publishing Company. So these guys likely made maps and other textbooks under government contract during World War II, and after the war they turned into a textbook manufacturer that was bought out by other companies and is still in existence today, known as the Ferguson Publishing Company. So that really doesn't help in our investigation, but what does help is the life and times of its author, Frank Monaghan, PhD, who's a very interesting person in his own right. He was born the 4th of November, 1904, Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and his father was a notorious person from the town who was killed during his incarceration and subsequent interrogation by the local police department. And Frank Jr. was involved in that incident, in that him and his brother came after his father had been killed and required a second autopsy, in which they found that he didn't die of natural causes and was killed during his custody. But that's really not important for his life, other than to show that he had overcome adversity at a young age. So he went to college, and in 1927 he was graduated from Cornell. He got his master's in 1928, and then did his dissertation at Yale in 1936 on John Jay, which is something he wrote a book out about, which he wrote several books previous to World War II. So he was a professor at Yale, and was actually very prominent, and was a very key historian, actually was the historian for the 1939 World's Fair. And there was a lot of kind of politics involved in it, which kind of is interesting towards the story of this book, and possibly why he allowed that picture to be inserted, even though, as anyone that has anything published knows, that you really don't have a choice over the pictures that are inserted into your copy for the most part when you're writing a book. So he was also involved in the Cavalcade of America, which was kind of like a educational program where they tried to make historical events fun and interesting rather than the boring stuff that they would have gotten in school. So that was during the 30s, and there's a very interesting passage in a book that I found as in reference to his consulting, the historical consulting on the Cavalcade. It says, in the end, Monaghan shared the dissatisfaction voiced by Hamer and the other archivists, historians, and librarians. He advised replacing 40% of the chosen documents with more relevant material, which of course was never done. Despite his long involvement with DuPont, Monaghan failed to understand or refused to accept that the corporate sponsor's agenda depended far less on the selection of relevant historical evidence than on the facade of historical truths from behind which it could be propagandized more securely. So it was clear that he had history's purity in mind, and it is at the root of what he was doing, but that there were clearly powers beyond his control that were changing what the end result was before it ended up getting to the public. So the book itself, and this is kind of a jump here, I believe to be a giveaway for war bond drives, maybe a prize, maybe something that at a certain level of donations that you would receive it. This V device on the front kind of leads me to that, as well as this picture that I found, which is very interesting. It's a 1943 press photo. Frank Monaghan, professor of Yale, speaks to the crowd, War Loan Drive. And so that's him right there, actually, our author, speaking to this huge crowd of people at a war bonds drive. Now, is it coincidence that the book is published the same year that he's talking to these people? Maybe. It's possible. So, just to give a little bit more insight into possibly why this book was made this way, kind of with the sensational extra people, I'll read this passage about another poignant fact here. And it says, the manipulation of symbols and words, propaganda, was the primary function of the Office of War Information, which was headed by Elmer Davis, a former network newscaster whose Indiana twang was familiar to millions. In addition to coordinating the dissemination of war information, the OWI was responsible for explaining at home and abroad U.S. policies and aims. The latter functionally finally resulted in a major split in the agency. On one side were writers and intellectuals, among them the young historian Arthur Schlesinger, who felt that the war's deeper issues were not being adequately spelled out to the American people. In March 1942, for example, a majority of those polled admitted to having no clear idea of why the war is all about. The writers wanted to stress the need to extinguish fascism and to achieve the four freedoms proclaimed by Roosevelt. So, on the other side were the advertising men recruited from Madison Avenue, who the writers asserted preferred slick salesmanship to honest information. In the spring of '43, 15 writers resigned, angrily accusing the OWI of attempting to soft soap the American public. So that's very important to our story here. And that is that there's two sides to this OWI split. One of them is the intellectuals, the other one is these advertising people, which Frank Monaghan, after his stint with the 1939 World's Fair, actually joins over to their side. Here's another quote here. Monaghan, thoroughly weary of the fair, was offered the job by the advertising agency of Batten, Barton, Durstein, and Osborne to be the historical consultant on the radio program Cavalcade of America, sponsored by DuPont. So there you have the direct correlation of Monaghan working directly with an advertising agency after working at the World's Fair. So he's actually on both sides of that argument that appears in this book. And this is that great Time Life series. I actually was able to get the entire set, which was a lucky score on my part. So there you have Monaghan on both sides of this debate of the Office of War Information, which is very interesting. So then you have something like this that comes up, and this was after the war. This is published, and this is the Scarsdale Enquirer, June 14th, 1946. And in here it says that the existence of one of the most interesting secret reports of World War II is revealed for the first time. The announcement of the War Department awards and recommendations for services for General Hap Arnold's Committee of Historians for the Study of Germany's War Potential. During a critical period of the war, General Arnold, then commanding general of the Army Air Forces, borrowed Major Frank Monaghan, a former history professor at Yale University, from the War Department Bureau of Public Relations. So there he is at the Public Relations Department, the OWI, to choose and direct a group of civilian historians in a study of the effects of the war upon Germany and the ability of the Nazi war machine to hold up under increasing Allied pressure. Major Monaghan is the nephew of so-and-so. When the committee was first assembled, General Arnold told the group of historians all available information, including secret and confidential, on the state of affairs within Germany, would be placed at their disposal. Working night and day, they read testimonies, interviewed officers. The report, classified as secret, was presented on January 1944. It was a remarkably accurate forecast of the things that ultimately came to pass. Major Monaghan, now Lieutenant Colonel, became chief of the analysis branch of the Bureau of Public Relations after concluding the report of the committee, and has received the oak leaf cluster of the Army Commendation Ribbon. In a personal citation of Colonel Monaghan, General Arnold said, "It is desired to commend Major Frank Monaghan for his skillful and successful work in assembling an outstanding group of historians for a special project of importance for the effective prosecution of the war. Major Monaghan was charged with making all arrangements, with planning and directing the work of historians, with the preparation of the report. These duties were executed in an exceptionally skillful, diplomatic, and efficient manner." So what we can conclude from this article is that he was involved in collecting data for the war after Pearl Harbor, so after December 1941 and before December 1943. He collected everything for this report. And after the report, they liked it so much, they put him in charge of the analysis branch. So he obviously did a good job. And probably as a cover, we have this. A cover and a consequence of his work on this project. We have this. So it was to motivate people. It had a bunch of different effects. It had a lot of different effects. Motivations on many, many different levels. And for this photograph to be inserted in there, I would highly doubt that Frank Monaghan would have had a problem ethically on any level. Nor would anybody else involved in the project, because it was all about this V right here, making this V happen. So I think that's pretty straightforward. I think the answer was a lot simpler than maybe I gave it credit for. I'm not sure. I thought it was something that was going to require a lot of outside thinking and, you know, foreign resources, etc., translation programs. But looks like the answer was a lot closer to home. And it turns out that Frank Monaghan ended up passing away the 1st of July 1969 from a long illness. So unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot that he can tell us about it. But then again, he'd be quite old by this point. So that pretty much concludes this investigation. And if you have anything that you'd like to add, either about Mr. Monaghan or about the events indicated in the previous two videos, then please, by all means, leave it. One thing that has not been satisfied is the names of the victims from the massacre at Bochnia. So if anyone does have those, it'd be great to send those to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum so that that information can be included with that photograph. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I appreciate all your comments, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot.